BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNed88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And just a quick reminder, every Monday is Zodiac Mondays. Wednesday is an Ask Me Anything. That's an AMA, so please drop your questions below for things that you would like discussed here on the show. And Friday is an Anything Goes. Any subject is fair game, mostly talking about true crime, serial killers, the Zodiac Killer, but any subject is welcome. All right, so please share some ideas in the comment section about what you would like to hear about on this channel, and let's get started. Okay, hello everybody. Today is Monday. Happy Labor Day to anyone who is listening to this on the day that it has been released. And if you're listening to this in the future, today is Monday, another Zodiac Monday. Welcome to the show. Today I will be discussing the book Zodiac Killer Solved by Ray Grant. But first, I would like to drop a couple of announcements. A big thank you to everyone who has been listening to the debunking videos that have been coming out over the weekend. I do a weekend segment where I try to quote-unquote debunk certain suspects whom I believe are absolutely not the Zodiac Killer, and that has now been made into a playlist. So if you haven't heard those videos previously, you can listen to them all in order, or if you'd like to listen again, the playlist makes it very convenient. You can also share with your friends or family, anyone who's curious about the true crime world. That playlist is available here on that channel under the same name, Zodiac Killer Suspects Debunked. And you can also download the audio of this program for free at LaunchPad 1. There's a link to that in the description box. You can take the audio on the go as a pure podcast, take it anywhere and anyhow. If you would like to download the video version, you can use YouTube Premium, but the audio version for free is at LaunchPad 1. There's a link in the description box. And there's always the TeeSpring page. Have a look at some of the t-shirts and merchandise. Remember, being weird is not a crime. And I'm also the author of the book Killer on a White Horse, a novel by me, Ned DeHaan, available on Amazon.com. There's a link to that in the description box as well. Many wonderful things in the description box. To get into today's episode, first I would like to set the scene by saying that I did a previous episode on Ray Grant's theory about the Zodiac Killer. It's just under that title, Zodiac Killer, Ray Grant Theory. And it examines the idea of multiple actors and multiple participants in the crime wave attributed to the Zodiac Killer. The Zodiac canonical crimes occurred in 1968 and 69, but in Ray Grant's theory we'll see very clearly that they begin in 1966 and continue all the way to 1981. Ray Grant's theory is a little bit different because he not only has multiple participants, but you would be like, many theories out there have multiple participants, multiple shooters or multiple actors. Some people think the Zodiac Killer was a partnership and there are actually two men that were involved with it. But a big difference that I see with Ray Grant's writings is that he has pinpointed a female participant in this one, a female who was involved with the planning and the thought processes and even being very active in some of the crimes, and her name is Berta Margulies. She is the mother of Michael O'Hare, and Michael O'Hare is more or less the trigger man in Ray Grant's theory. So you have Michael O'Hare, Berta Margulies, and then Gareth Penn, who was the author of the book Time 17. Ray Grant refers to him as Gareth Penn's publicist. And then Hugh Penn, the father of Gareth Penn, is also an active participant in planning these murders. Now, Hugh Penn is someone who worked for the California State Attorney General's office as well as the Department of Transportation. He was a statistician, very capable at compiling information about other people, particularly the victims. So this is one of the few times, though, that I think a female participant has been introduced into the Zodiac Killer mystery. I did once cite the video from Aphrodite when he shared his theory about the Zodiac, saying that he thought there was a female presence, and he shared this in two ways. The first is that he just thought that there was this type of feminine presence with the composition of the letters or the ciphers or in the design process, like a woman was involved with the planning. And then later on in his video, and being clear, that's not Ray Grant's, this is a YouTuber named Aphrodite, and he said that he alluded to the point where he thought maybe it is the Zodiac Killer being a homosexual and like a man who is wrestling with his feminine side, and there's this type of internal battle. He didn't say that directly, but he did allude to it. But Ray Grant talks very clearly about not a homosexual, but a woman was involved with the planning process. Her name is Berta Margulies. She was originally born in Poland. She crossed continental Europe after World War One. I think that's the only way to describe it. First going from Poland, I believe it's to Belgium, then to the Netherlands, then to England, then makes her way to the United States, goes back to Europe for some time, and then comes back to America once again. And she actually went on to become a very established artist, particularly working in sculpture. With Ray Grant's book here, Zodiac Killer Solved, which he provided me with, he sent me a copy. Thank you to Ray Grant. I found two things that I absolutely liked about it, and some points that I will challenge later on. To share the points that I liked, I thought, number one, the timeline in the murder of Sherry Jo Bates, and number two, comparing the Zodiac Killer to other serial killers, particularly Ted Bundy and the Phantom Killer from Texarkana in 1946 are discussed in this book. I cannot, overstate how important that is. I cannot tell you how important that is. It is so incredibly important to have those types of discussions because the Zodiac Killer and the crimes that were committed, whether it's from 66 to 81 or 68 and 69, those crimes have been committed in somewhat of an unconventional way for a serial killer. And first, let's talk about Sherry Jo Bates, because even though I do not believe that Sherry Jo Bates was a genuine Zodiac Killer victim, Ray Grant does, and I would like to go over to his timeline in his book, Zodiac Killer Solved, where he talks about the day that Sherry Jo Bates died, October 30th of 1966. 8 a.m., Sherry Jo Bates attended Mass with her father. 9 a.m., after Mass, Sherry and Joseph Bates stopped on the way back to eat breakfast at Sandy's restaurant. There's that horrible name Sandy again. 9:30 a.m., Sherry Jo and her father returned home. 10 a.m., Joseph left to spend the day at the beach, an hour's drive from Riverside, most likely Huntington Beach or Newport Beach near the Pacific Ocean. And then 3 p.m., Sherry called her friend Stephanie Gutman of 2874 McKinley Street, but there was no answer. 3:45 p.m., Sherry Jo called again, and this time Stephanie answered. It might be pronounced Stefani, Stefani, was home, and she asked if Stephanie wanted to go to Riverside City College Library that evening. That is where Sherry Jo will be murdered, possibly, that evening to get some books and study a little. Stephanie declined. 4:30 p.m., friends of Sherry Jo Bates went past her house and saw her green lime Volkswagen Beetle parked out front. 3:45 to 4:45, Sherry Jo prepared supper for herself, and she made roast beef and vegetables and had a glass of milk. I believe that this is just like something that came out of a box, like pre-prepared, and she just heated it up based on the way that it's described here. 5 p.m., Sherry Jo Bates left for the RCC Library, Riverside City College Library. This is very important because it's a big discrepancy around the timeline. Many people will cite that Sherry Jo Bates went out around 6:30 p.m. to the RCC Library, and we even have a phone call that from Sherry Jo Bates' father, Joseph, when he said he called his own home to invite Sherry Jo for supper at a friend's house, but received a busy signal, and he called again at 5:15, and he got a busy signal, and he finally drove back home, and when he drove back home, Sherry Jo was not there, and that was arriving at 5:20 p.m., so says the book here, and Joseph finds the famous note, "Dad went to RCC Library." Most people will say that Sherry Jo went to the library at 6:30, and to Ray Grant's credit, he is the first person that I ever read who identified that. I mean, last year on the channel, I said something small about that when I just found a post that had been written by Ray Grant online talking about how it is commonly assumed that Sherry Jo went at 6:30 p.m. to the library and not 5 or 5:15 at the absolute latest, or 5:05 or something in that ballpark, because that could be An hour and a half of her day was missing. An hour and a half of the timeline had to be adjusted. And people who follow true crime cases will know that it is so important to get those details right, because what on earth could have happened in that hour and a half? 90 minutes is a very long stretch of time. And it is commonly assumed, though, that Sherry Joe left at 6:30, so it is somewhat of a discrepancy. But let's look at the 6:30 and see what people are thinking. 6:05 to 6:20, Sherry Joe Bates got back in her car and drove once more to Riverside, meaning she went back home and then went back to RCC. 6:10 p.m., a friend of hers saw her lime green Volkswagen Beetle driving toward RCC on Magnolia Avenue. The friend waved, but Sherry apparently didn't see her. 6:15, a March Air Force baseman had just parked in an alley about a block from the RCC library, and he saw a lime green VW drive past him in the alley to follow another car. Another point that sets Ray Grant's theory apart from other Zodiac theorists is, as I said, not all people think Sherry Joe Bates was killed by the Zodiac Killer, including me, but he does. But he believes Sherry Joe Bates was abducted prior to her murder, as well as David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen being abducted prior to their murders. They are the victims of the Lake Herman Road shooting on December 20th of 1968. With the Bates theory, I think that is somewhat widely understood and widely discussed. I'm not saying that I endorse it one way or another, but because of that time frame about how there could be activities that are going on, Sherry Joe isn't staying at home until 6:30 p.m. Lots of different activities are happening in that hour and a half, particularly the way she's driving back and forth as she have plans to meet people, and all of that could have taken place. But Ray Grant does also state that at 6:20 p.m., Sherry Joe Bates parked her car on Terracina Drive about a block west of the library entrance. Now, what happened after that, that is very, very difficult to say. I just wanted to share that I have heard from other sources that they believe Sherry Joe Bates was abducted prior to her murder, and then some events had taken place, and later on Sherry Joe would be found in an alleyway somewhere close to the RCC library on Halloween morning, October 31st of 1966, and she had been stabbed multiple times. There's a very famous, and I guess you just say commonly held belief on the internet that Sherry Joe was stabbed 42 times. I've said it many times on the channel. I read it somewhere on the internet. First, somebody corrected me saying, I've read the autopsy report, she was stabbed far less than that. And I was like, okay, but you're not, and then later on, though, I heard Tom Voigt's podcast, Murder Basement, and he said that exact same sentence. So I think the person was just quoting Tom Voigt, saying, I read the autopsy report and she was stabbed far less than that. But what Ray Grant talks about here in the book Zodiac Killer Solved is that Sherry Joe Bates was perhaps cut 42 times. The number 42 includes any type of superficial lacerations. She had at least 7 major cuts to her throat that could be viewed as stab wounds or slashes, but counting every single prick of the skin, there would be 42 small cuts, and the autopsies do record this. Richard Grinnell of ZodiacCiphers.com had a very well-detailed illustration of how Cecilia Shepard was stabbed numerous times. I believe it was actually 12, counting like the 3-inch laceration on her wrist, but most people believe Cecilia Shepard from Lake Berryessa was stabbed 10 times. If you count cuts and superficial lacerations, the count goes higher. But about the RCC library, I would like to go to Ray Grant's point here when he says, Sherry Joe Bates never made it to the RCC library that night. There would seem to be no reasonable conclusion, but no one saw Sherry Joe Bates after 6:15 p.m. that night because she never made it to the RCC library. That throws out the 6:30 timeline completely. And because she never made it to the RCC library, it simply would not have been possible for such an outgoing person after parking at 6:20 p.m. to spend 2 hours and 40 minutes in such a small side space without any library patrons being aware of her. But maybe Sherry Joe had tunnel vision because of her impending midterm paper assignment. There is no indication whatsoever that Sherry was feeling any less sociable that day than she normally did. So I think this relates to how some people have composed this theory that Alright, Sherry Jo Bates enters the library and she just goes to a back table or something to study and she doesn't talk to anyone for this entire duration. I find that very suspicious, and I do think there would be more people who would have noticed her. But, to move on to some other crimes associated with the Zodiac Killer, and to talk about this group murder theory, there were four Zodiacs, and they're frequently referred to as the Zodiacs in the book. I would like to move on from the murder of Sherry Jo Bates to the canonical crimes. As I said, Lake Herman Road has that difference that Rick Grant has talked about, and even after reading the book Zodiac Killer Solved, I'm still not completely sure how the victims at Lake Herman Road were abducted prior to the murder, and Ray Grant can correct me if he wants on anything, but I'm not completely certain how David and Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen would have been abducted prior to being shot in that parking lot on Lake Herman Road. With Blue Rock Springs and Lake Berryessa and the Paul Stein murder in Presidio Heights, Ray Grant is very adamant about a particular Zodiac suspect, and his name is Michael Henry O'Hare. Gareth Penn talked about him in the book Times 17, and after learning about Gareth Penn's work, Ray Grant is the person who made the connection that Michael O'Hare, Gareth Penn, Hugh Penn, and Berta Margolis, Michael's mother, were the people who were behind this, and they were involved with the planning process. But one point that I think is very difficult for me to digest is a theory that is put forward in this book. On October 11th of 1969, Paul Stein is murdered. He is the taxi driver. He is the only lone male that was killed by the Zodiac in the canonical crimes. And Ray Grant has put forward the theory that there were two people in the back of Paul Stein's taxi, Michael O'Hare and Berta Margolis, a man and a woman. Yes, Michael O'Hare brought his mother to a serial killing operation, and that the taxi is driving to Washington and Maple Street. Berta Margolis exits the taxi, and then Michael O'Hare commits the murder of Paul Stein on Washington and Cherry Street. Then some type of signal is given among these four Zodiacs, and that there's actually a phone call that is made from Berta Margolis to the police saying that the perpetrator was the, forgive my language, but the NMA, the Negro male adult. That's why the APB was put out saying that they need to be on the lookout for a black man. If you've ever looked into anything associated with the Zodiac Killer mystery, you'll probably have heard that story about how the Zodiac walks right past the officers because they were expecting that there was going to be a black man that they needed to be on the lookout for, saying that was actually Berta Margolis who made the call, an active participant in the Zodiac Killer mystery, as well as the person who was heavily involved with the planning process. And I would invite Ray Grant to weigh in on this as well. Like, is it possible that Berta Margolis is the overall mastermind of this entire operation as a form of very deviant conceptual art and such? Is that really what the focus of his theory is? Now, I am all for speculation. I am all for theorizing and hypothesizing, if I can pronounce the word correctly. Hypothesizing. Okay, I can't say the word, but I'm all for it, whatever it is. I don't know why I can't say that word today. Hypotheses. There, that one sounded a little bit better. I'm all for people creating hypotheses and their own theories. But I just do not believe that Ray Grant can come up with that level of information based on what we know of the Paul Stein murder, that there was a man and a woman in the back of Paul Stein's taxi, no matter who it is, and that a woman, the active participant in the Zodiac Killer crimes, was the one who tipped the authorities off on the black man who was supposed to have been seen in the area. I just think that that is too far. Now, as I said, I do love speculation because you might be listening to an interview with somebody and the podcast host will be trying to pressure them. Come on. You must have some idea about that. And they're like, no, I don't want to speculate. No, it's not fair. Wouldn't be fair to say. I'm like, put your idea out there. You can say, no, this is my theory on what happened, or this is my hypothesis on what happened. Hypothesizing. I think that one sounded a little bit better. But sometimes they simply don't do it. I think it's acceptable as long as you're clear that it is what you think happened as opposed to what you know with certainty happened. But in this case, I simply don't believe that he has the ability to generate that level of specific detail in the Paul Stine murder. But Ray Grant does discuss one thing in his book about how Richard Grinnell of Zodiac Ciphers did talk about how there could be two people in the back of Paul Stine's taxi. I think it was in 2015 or 16 that he discussed this. That was the date that was listed in the book. And that was the reason why we have these two conflicting witness descriptions of how there is one of a 25 to possibly early 30s male, and then there's the other one of the mid 30s to early 40s male. They're two different witness descriptions after the Stein murder. Now, I don't know what Richard Grinnell said in 2015 or 16, but I know what he says in 2021, what he has shared with me here on Black Box Online Radio, as well as on Facebook via the group The Zodiac Killer Library. The 25 to 30-year-old witness description never happened. That was not a witness description. That was the age that was attributed to the composite sketch by the authorities. Like, there was never anyone who said they saw a 25-year-old perpetrator after the Stein shooting. So I'd also like to throw that in as somewhat of a challenge. Now, as for Lake Berryessa, I really did mean to do the events out of order. But here's something else that Ray Grant has shared in his book, Zodiac Killer Solved, and that is that, well, this is actually a widely held theory, widely held belief about the Zodiac Killer mystery, that the Zodiac didn't want the victims to die at Lake Berryessa. Lake Berryessa is the only crime that occurred in the daytime. Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard were stabbed on or around or thereabouts at 6:30 p.m. on September 27th of 1969. And this is the only time the Zodiac Killer is wearing the black costume with the clip-on sunglasses and the Zodiac symbol, and it has that rectangular shape at the top. The only time. And the Zodiac wanted the victims to survive, to tell the story of the costume, and to tell the story of how the perpetrator had attacked them. So, it is something that people have brought to my attention many times. They're like, if Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard didn't survive the stabbing, we never would have known the Zodiac was wearing that elaborate costume. And here's a problem, though. On the podcast Zodiac Speaking, they did point out that Brian Hartnell only lived by a millimeter. He was a millimeter away from dying and having his injuries to be fatal. And unless the person is a doctor, I don't know how they could have had the awareness that stabbing somebody in the back 6 or 7 times, or stabbing someone in 10 times like Cecilia Shepard, would allow them to live. And again, I think that the perpetrator at Lake Berryessa knew he was going to kill them, or he thought that he was going to kill them, and that was the ambition. I just don't see how that anyone could have that awareness that they were going to live for any extended period of time. Now, you do have to wonder about why the Zodiac behaved in that way. One simple example is that he had never done it before, and Brian Hartnell even asks him, "Are you nervous?" And he says, "Yeah, I guess so." And Brian's like, "Yeah, I would be nervous too." So I think that one explanation is simply that he was just very nervous, but somebody brought to my attention about how Richard Gaikowski was an Army medic, and he's a Zodiac Killer suspect that Tom Voigt, as well as Goldcatcher, talk a lot about. And if Geik were an Army medic, then he would have been able to have the awareness of leaving both the victims dead after Lake Berryessa. I can do better than an Army medic. How about Dr. George Hill Hodel, Steve Hodel's suspect in the Zodiac Killer mystery? He was a surgeon, or he was a doctor who was educated in surgery, let's say that to be precise. He would have had the medical awareness to know about how to leave both the victims dead at Lake Berryessa. They're tied up. Their hands are tied to their feet, hog-tied, and they're completely incapacitated. They're in an invulnerable place when they wouldn't be able to fight back. Anyone who had medical knowledge would know how to kill them. And when I discussed this with Tom Voigt, he simply said that you don't have to be an Army medic or a doctor to know that slitting someone's throat is more likely to kill them. Anybody would know that. Why did the Zodiac behave that way at Lake Berryessa? I don't know. That was his response. And yeah, I don't know either. But I think that it is almost impossible to know that the victims would have survived a stabbing attack like that. But Ray Grant is also consistent about how Cecilia Shepard is thrashing about, and Brian Hartnell just went along with the stab wounds. He didn't try and flail and thrash about. Cecilia started moving very intensely, and she was turned over onto her stomach where the perpetrator continued to stab her. So, I mean, if they hadn't survived, we would never know the story of that elaborate costume, and people would probably be debating the authenticity of that crime to this day. But someone, Cecilia Shepard, was murdered by a criminal wearing the Zodiac Killer symbol. Now, onto that point. After Lake Berryessa, a message has been written on the car door that shows that there's the Zodiac symbol, the dates of Zodiac activity. It says Vallejo and by knife. Alright, so I think that substitutes a letter. Like, many people are like, why didn't the Zodiac Killer write in a letter after Lake Berryessa saying, I'm the person who stabbed those two people at Lake Berryessa? I think that substituted a letter. Now, with the Paul Stein murder, which I was previously discussing, again, sorry for saying those out of order, there was a piece of Paul Stein's shirt that was mailed in. Paul Stein, the taxi driver, he is shot in the back of the taxi. I mean, maybe Berta Margulies was present there, maybe not. No matter what theory that you agree with, Paul Stein is shot, and then a single male is seen moving Paul Stein's body around in the taxi. One point that I would challenge Ray Grant on is he says that the witnesses, I mean, I can't even say that it's Ray Grant's, the witnesses did say this, that they saw the Zodiac cradling Paul Stein in his lap when he's moving around for things, but people also believe that he's trying to cut a piece of his shirt off. But instead, I think that that's actually the Zodiac pushing Paul Stein's body to the floorboards so he's not getting more blood on his taxi. He just appeared like that because they didn't get a good look at him. And then a piece of Paul Stein's shirt is cut off. Okay, why did he do that? I mean, this is one point that numerous people have brought to my attention. There would be no need at all to do that. And this is one of Ray Grant's genuine observations. It would be so unnecessary. In the first Zodiac letter, the Zodiac says, I will state some facts that only I and the police know. All right, well, why didn't he just do that after the Stein murder? I am the murderer of the taxi driver. To prove that I did it, I will state some facts that only I and the police know. That he was first driving to Washington and Mabel and then dropped off at Washington and Cherry. He was wearing this color socks. He had this type of shoelaces. In his car, he had a little Buddha coin or something. I'm making that stuff up. That's not real, by the way. But he could have easily said some things about the murder of Paul Stein if he had actually done it. Now, why would he cut off a piece of Paul Stein's shirt? Well, there could be numerous explanations for this. I personally think that it's paying homage to Jack the Ripper, and that Paul Stein was well, he didn't. The Zodiac didn't want to cut out Paul Stein's kidney the way the Ripper did to Catherine Eddowes, so instead he cuts off a piece of his shirt and mails it in. It's a little bit easier, less gruesome, and you could do it without getting caught. I mean, I suppose he's not going to cut out Paul Stein's kidney in the taxi cab or anything like that, so I think you can get the idea there. But in terms of comparing serial killers to one another, I said that I truly like the sections in the book that compare the Zodiac Killer to Ted Bundy and the Texarkana Moonlight Murderer, also known as the Phantom Killer. Now, I have said for a long time that I believe that the Zodiac studied 3 true crime cases: Sherry Joe Bates, Jack the Ripper, and the Moonlight Murders. Ray Grant had an excellent observation when he said, why does the Phantom Killer have such a similarity to the Zodiac Killer? Or let's say that in reverse. Why does the Zodiac resemble the Phantom Killer so much? It's almost as if someone, or the group of people who had been involved with this, had the awareness and the idea that there was this is how you're going to make an impact. If you share your information in this way, people will respond in a certain way. And because it had been done in Texarkana in 1946, the Zodiac, or group of people, knew exactly how the media would respond to it. There's a reason why they didn't just do a bunch of weird stuff, or the Zodiac didn't just do a bunch of weird stuff. It was because if you did something similar to the way the Moonlight murders were committed, or something similar to the way the Jack the Ripper murders were committed, the media would respond in an expected manner. So that point I think I completely agree with. And also, Ray Grant pointed out one thing, that there could be a direct homage and direct allusion to the Phantom Killer and the Moonlight Murders of 1946. And just to provide a little background info, this is the guy who's wearing a hood, who's targeting lovers' lanes, and he is very roughly attacking the victims. I have numerous episodes on the Moonlight Murders, but when I first learned about that, my response was undeniable similarities to the Zodiac Killer case. I think it's an excellent observation. And then you also have the Phantom Killer doing things like sexual assaults, which are quite different. The Zodiac Killer crimes were definitely not about sexual assaults. So then, I mean, I would like to go to a specific letter that was mailed in that Ray Grant made an observation about, and that is the Red Phantom, because there's a line that says, "Red Phantom, red with rage," and Ray Grant points out if his name is Red Ray Grant, red with rage, does that mean his name is actually Red Ray Grant? No, that means that he is, it's using it as an adjective, saying that he is red. His name is Ray, but he is red. I'm the Red Phantom, red with rage, meaning that he is the Phantom. It's paying tribute or homage or acknowledging the Phantom Killer from 1946. I thought that was a really good observation. With Ted Bundy, there is a big difference that happened. Of course, Bundy comes later, but with Ted Bundy, he's so much more of a typical serial killer than the Zodiac. And I really liked these comparisons in Ray Grant's book, Zodiac Killer Solved, because Ted Bundy was somebody who felt betrayed by his parents. He learned of a deeply, darkly held family secret about how his sister was actually his biological mother, and she was just playing the role of being his sister, and he felt betrayed. It's what I call shattering of the pillars of childhood. And then he went on to feel betrayed by another woman, an ex-lover, and he had a particular type of victim that he was targeting that resembled that ex-lover. But Ray Grant also points out that when Ted Bundy is pulled over by the police, he doesn't have a front seat in his car. He has a kill kit in the backseat that has all kinds of things like weapons and the pre-cut lengths of rope, and I think trash bags as well. So he has a kill kit. Ted Bundy is also sexually assaulting the victims. He is also luring the victims to secluded areas, killing them with blunt force. He is somebody who is acting with a pattern to satiate sexual urges, and you will find that countless times in the world of serial killer operations. And I think that it's important to draw this comparison because the Zodiac Killer simply didn't do that. The victims were not sexually assaulted. The canonical victims were not killed with blunt force trauma, as well as the Zodiac isn't driving around hunting down the victims the way that Ted Bundy would, or putting on this facade about luring somebody into their vehicle. I don't accept that the Kathleen Johns incident was genuine Zodiac activity. But when I was reading Ray Grant's book, I saw that one of the crimes that he does attribute to the Zodiac Killer is the 1969 murder of Shelley Holmboe, Holmboe, and she was a 2-year-old who died. And I did a little bit of reading, and the alternative theory is actually that she was killed by wild dogs. I had never heard of the murder of Shelley Holmboe, or the death of Shelley Holmboe, rather, before reading Ray Grant's book, and I would love to do a larger episode on that, but I can share something with you. I don't believe that any Zodiac Killer targeted children. As far as additional crimes that could have been connected to the Zodiac Killer, as I said, the Zodiac, Ray Grant accuses the Zodiacs, plural, these 4 people of doing other things outside of the realm of murder, particularly setting wildfires, but also the 1981 murder of Joan Webster. Now, before I did my regular weekly podcast on the disappearance of Donna Lass, I did a regular weekly segment on the disappearance and murder of Joan Webster, and there will be a regularly scheduled Donna Lass episode this week where we will be talking about Ray Grant's comments on that. So please, you can like and subscribe, follow along with any of these. Ray Grant has a whole section on Donna Lass that I also thought was very good, and we'll be discussing that on Thursday. But with the 1981 murder of Joan Webster, she was abducted on November 28th of 1981, and her remains were discovered near Tobacco Road in Hamilton, Massachusetts in 1990. So, firstly, let's look at the suspects in the murder of Joan Webster. We have Michael O'Hare, whom Gareth Penn identified as a suspect. Ray Grant also believes that Michael O'Hare was the perpetrator. Gareth Penn is a suspect himself. He's been accused by a couple people, including Joe from the Zodiac Killer Insights series. The authorities have a suspect named Leonard Paradiso, who was reported to have been a serial killer, although I don't know if he ever actually murdered anyone. They just blamed him for crimes. And the fourth suspect is somebody named Andrew Palumbo, whom Eve Carson, author of the book Mommy's a Mole, Whale of a Tale, and sister-in-law of Joan Webster, has identified as a suspect in her murder. But Eve Carson definitely has multiple participants in her theory. Let's go through these one by one. The authorities absolutely do not believe in any type of Zodiac killer connection to the 1981 murder of Joan Webster. I had previously contacted the former district attorney who has written the book The Paradiso Files, and I asked him if he would be interviewed for the show Black Box Online Radio, and he said he could not do the interview, but I was like, can you at least give a comment? And what he said was, as for a comment, Paradiso openly bragged about killing Joan Webster while awaiting trial for the murder of a different woman, Marie Iannuzzi. Mr. Paradiso provided details of how he committed both murders to two individuals, who then provided significant corroborative evidence in the case that could have come from no other source than Leonard Paradiso. The jury also heard extensive evidence about other suspects at Mr. Paradiso's trial. There is no question in my mind that Paradiso and he alone was responsible for the deaths of Marie Iannuzzi and Joan Webster. So that's what the former district attorney Tim Burke, author of the Paradiso Files, has to say. Now, Leonard Paradiso is addressed in the book Zodiac Killer Solved by Ray Grant, saying that he was some guy who was a slob, who was a clam digger, and this clam-smelling slob just picks up Joan Webster from an airport and takes her somewhere. Why on earth would she get in a taxi with him? I think Ray Grant's exact line was, I don't think so. And yes, I do have to agree that that seems unlikely. Leonard Paradiso doesn't seem like a very convincing suspect in the murder of Joan Webster. And I mentioned Marie Iannuzzi briefly. Well, what Eve Carson's theory is that Joan Webster's disappearance was highly publicized. She was waiting in the taxi line at Logan Airport in Boston, Massachusetts on November 28th. She was traveling because of Thanksgiving break, trying to go back to Harvard, where she was what? An architecture student. Michael O'Hare has a degree in architecture, and he is a lecturer on public policy in association with architecture. A lot of his writings are online if you'd like to read those. Okay, so the theory is that Leonard Paradiso approached Joan Webster and said that he was operating a taxi. Hey, come on and get in my car and I'll charge you a cheaper rate. Where you going, toots? Something to that effect. And she's just like, oh, okay, I guess so. Cheaper rate. Yep, he called me toots or something. So she gets into his taxi. I think it's a little bit far-fetched, but it is an unsolved case. No one has ever been convicted for the 1981 murder of Joan Webster. Let's be very clear about that. Paradiso was convicted for the 1979 murder of Marie Iannuzzi, which he is perhaps not the best suspect in. And then they attributed the death of Joan Webster to Paradiso. But you heard the district attorney there, and I'll let you guys be the judge. You can also hear numerous episodes about the death of Joan Webster here on this channel, Black Box Online Radio. As I said, I did a previous weekly segment on that, and I've also interviewed Eve Carson extensively. As far as the theory involving Andrew Palumbo, I said Eve Carson had her own suspect. That follows at least two people involved with the theory. The first is that there's a composite sketch that has been made of the man who approached Joan Webster at the airport. He's referred to as the bearded man. If you look at him on this channel, you'll see he is next to a photo of Gareth Penn, and I think he resembles Gareth Penn much more so than Michael O'Hare. But Ray Grant did say he thought they were working together. So what happens after that is Joan Webster believes that that is not Gareth Penn in the sketch, that Gareth Penn was not the bearded man, that Michael O'Hare was not the bearded man, that instead, that is George Webster, Joan's own father, and that he had his daughter set up for murder. I mean, like, she has said that to me, but not in those exact terms, and that she was driven to a place in the northeastern part of Massachusetts, and she was murdered by the trooper Andrew Palumbo, and that he was the person who delivered the fatal blow, striking Joan Webster in the back of the head, and then her body was buried in the ground. Now, there does seem to be some dispute about how that Joan's remains were moved to a different location. Ray Grant suggests that it was 9 months before the discovery was made on Chabaco Road in 1990, that about 8 or 9 months prior, Joan Webster's remains were moved to a different location, and he even postulated that there could be some type of incriminating note that was going to be left behind, that Michael O'Hare was going to confess to it, and this was all because, let's look at the timeline. Sherry Jo Bates is murdered in 1966, and that's 15 years later to 1981. If you read the book Time 17 by Gareth Penn, he talks very clearly about how there are two important numbers in the world of Michael O'Hare, 17 and 38. That time 17 is being used as a signature, more or less, to give you the nutshell version. 38 is a connection to his mother. So 15 years after 1966 is 1981. In 1966, Michael O'Hare was 23 years old at the time of the Bates murder. 15 years later, he would have been 38, that other important number, that the murder of Joan Webster was meant to be the final crime. And then Ray Grant also said that there was a possible suicide plot that was going to happen, where Michael O'Hare was going to commit suicide on the MIT Tower in 1989, but that certainly didn't happen. And I know this for a fact because Michael O'Hare has been seen in numerous forms of media, and I talked to him yesterday. And I contacted Michael O'Hare based on information that was actually provided in Ray Grant's book. He has a phone number, email address, and I was like, wow, that really is a lot. He's sharing his social security number, addresses, phone number, email. I think that that's perhaps too much. Then on the other hand was, screw it, I'll contact him anyway. All he has to do is say, no, I don't want to talk to you. So I contacted Michael O'Hare, and I asked him about the allegations in Ray Grant's book. This is the second time I've ever tried to reach out to a Zodiac killer suspect, and the first time was when I was contacted by someone who thought their psychologist was the Zodiac. You can hear about that in Zodiac Killer, the Arthur Frank story. But Michael O'Hare responded to me rather quickly. I don't know how I knew this, but I knew he was going to. I just found this email address, so I wrote him, a message saying, hey, I'm reading the book Zodiac Killer Solved by Ray Grant. I'm going to be doing a discussion on it for BlackBoxOnlineRadio, a book response, book discussion. Do you have any comment about Ray Grant's theories and the accusations of not only being the Zodiac Killer, but being part of this 4-person Zodiac team with the other participants, as we said, Gareth Penn, Hugh Penn, Berta Margulies, and of course Michael O'Hare himself? And I knew he was going to respond quickly. I checked my phone about 15 minutes after sending that email, and lo and behold, there was a response from Michael O'Hare. And then when I opened the message, I was a little bit crestfallen, to say the least, because it was a blank message, and there was just one thing at the bottom. There was an attachment, and it was to an article that had been written by Michael O'Hare called Confessions of a Non-Serial Killer. It's about 9 pages long, and I've read some of it previously, the parts that have been posted on ZodiacCiphers.com, and I might do an entire response to this on the True Crime Talk radio segment that happens on Tuesdays, just to give Michael O'Hare a fair chance. But the long story short is, he doesn't want to talk too much about this. I did exchange other messages with him, being clear, but this was just the first one that was shared. And he says, though, in his article, and I have read this off in a previous episode, but the decades since Gareth Penn fixed his sights on me as having been the Zodiac Killer have not been a living hell, as much as that would spice up the story. They have been an ordinary life punctuated by one or another flurry or fuss from Gareth Penn, sometimes involving pages or numbers, for example, the data pages from my PhD thesis, with this or that sequence picked out and circled and decoded into words that fit into Penn's model of the crimes. As I understand it, Penn first decided that I was the culprit after analyzing the Zodiac's messages to the San Francisco Chronicle, determining that the murderer was an artist with the initials HOH, whose crimes formed on a map and some sort of graphic having to do with a radian, the angle formed by laying a circle's radius to the circumference 57.29 degrees, and Mount Diablo's Bay Area landmark. There is something about water whose chemical formula can be written HOH. I don't want to be cute about the murders, which not only left victims and grieving relatives in their wake, but also frightened a lot of people and frustrated California and Massachusetts law enforcement. Massachusetts is talking about the 1981 murder of Joan Webster. So, for the record, I am not the Zodiac Killer, had absolutely nothing to do with those or any other murders. As far as I know, I wasn't even in California when any of them happened. Similarly, I had nothing to do with the death of Joan Webster, a Boston College student whose murder Penn had also tried to pin on me. A note to the Zodiac hobbyists and Penn aficionados: please don't bother parsing the foregoing for cleverly worded non-denials and numerological incriminating clues. If you don't like my choice of words, feel free to make up other language that you would take as a fiat. Yeah, does it say flat or fiat? It's kind of hard to say in this font that it's been written in, but other languages you would take as just, that doesn't have any special additional meaning. And as I said, though, I did exchange more messages with Michael O'Hare because I wasn't satisfied with that. He sent me this thing that has already been posted online, but I will respond to that in more detail on Tuesday. And what I really wanted to know was, what is your response to Ray Grant's theory about how there is this four-person Zodiac team? Ray Grant has talked about Michael O'Hare, Gareth Penn, Gareth Penn's father Hugh Penn, and Berta Margulies, that they've been operating together as creating more or less a larger conceptual art piece that has been loaded with mathematical signatures, but even down to the number of stab wounds at Lake Berryessa or the bullets that have been fired at Lake Herman Road, all of that had significance and meaning. And that, as I said about the numbers matching up, about the 17 and the 38 and 15 years after 1966, Michael O'Hare is 38 years old. What is your response to any of that? And what Michael O'Hare has written out for me is, I know nothing about Ray Grant, and I have nothing to add about this whole mishegus beyond what I put in that article. Good luck with your show. Firstly, I absolutely hope Michael O'Hare is not the Zodiac Killer, because then the Zodiac would be saying good luck with BlackBoxOnlineRadio. I have the strong suspicion that in that case he would be listening to every single episode, eating popcorn and laughing, and I don't want that. But as far as Mishegus goes, I was like, what the hell is that? I had to Google it or something, and it turns out that it comes from a Yiddish word, and it means crazy or craziness, a lot like Meshuga, sometimes written Meshuggah, and yeah, crazy or craziness. When you read the name Michael Henry O'Hare, you probably wouldn't think about someone with that name being Jewish, but yes, Michael O'Hare is Jewish. His mother, Berta Margulies, was a Polish Jew who left Poland after World War I, as I said. Not that that means anything, I was quite surprised at that choice of words. And I would just want to share a couple things about Ray Grant's book as we get closer to the end of this episode, because there were some other parts that really stood out to me. And one of them is talking about the way that the victims were portrayed and is just the entire narrative. And I'd like to read a little section of his book here. They originally intended to go to San Francisco. This is talking about Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard. The couple ultimately decided that, partly due to Brian Hartnell's having to drive a TV set back to his campus room and then return, they didn't have enough time to drive all the way. Brian then suggested they go to Lake Berryessa, to a particular spot he liked there. Lake Berryessa is at most an hour's drive from St. Helena, which would have gotten Brian and Cecilia home at then circa 3 p.m. So it's quite possible they started to drive towards San Francisco, thought it better of it at some point and then doubled back. We know the Zodiac and Riverside and Lake Herman Road abducted pre-selected victims and then placed them in specific locations on the landscape. Oh no, wait a second. This is why I wanted to talk about this. Do we really know that? I know Ray Grant is hypothesizing, did I say that correctly? That this is what happened, but I don't think that is an established fact completely that either Sherry Jo Bates or David Faraday were abducted. Now, people have talked about it, but I think it's still undetermined. Now, we know that they had a little list of potential victims who clearly had something in common other than lifestyles. This is something that other people have been debating about until the end of time. Some people think that the Zodiac didn't care at all about the victims. It was about the locations. I mean, you heard Michael O'Hare talking about the angles and such, Gareth Penn and his radian theory. But also, there is the idea that, okay, the victims were pre-chosen, they did have meaning, and they were put on a list. And I think Ray Grant said something in the book that there was a pre-chosen list of victims, and they were murdered whenever the group of the Zodiacs could get activity and access to them. And as you see very clearly from this, that they're not just having one trigger man and 3 people are involved in the planning process, as I said about the Stein murder. They would be actively involved with the actions and with these murders. And some of the absolute final points that I would like to address are partly from Ray Grant's book, but also from a post that he had written out on a forum. This is from Tappa Talk. And I have read this off before on the episode Zodiac Killer Suspect Lists For and Against, when I was talking about the pros and cons of various Zodiac theorists. Zodiologists, if you will, like the points that I thought were very strong, as well as some ones that I wanted to challenge. And somebody asked Ray Grant a question on Tappa Talk, and to sum it up is, first, his name is Jose, shout out to him. It was asking about why do people dismiss Ray Grant's theory without challenging it on its merits. And Ray Grant actually responded by saying, "Hi Jose, thank you for your interest in my work. Thanks also to Tom Voigt for allowing me to reply to your post on this forum. Since you listened to my House of Mystery episode and read from my book, I assume you're familiar with my material, so I won't bother repeating points I've made elsewhere." And as we said, he has 4 major participants in his theory, the 4 Zodiacs, that they are referred to in the books. I mean, he calls them the Zodiacs, but 4 people, Michael O'Hare, Gareth Penn, Berta Margulies, and Hugh Penn. And Ray Grant continues by saying, "I will instead attempt to answer your question directly. Number 1, what's the main reason why people think that this theory involving Gareth Penn, Hugh Penn, Berta Margulies, and Michael O'Hare is so nonsensical? My general theory is that the Zodiac murders are an extremely sinister example of conceptual art, a project which was thought up back in the mid-1960s by 4 conspirators, Margulies, O'Hare, Penn, and Hugh Penn, and then set into motion in Riverside in 1966. The Zodiac project consisted of murders and other assaults and demonstrations involving actual victims and advertisements, such as the Zodiac letters and the call to the Oakland Police Department that resulted in the Channel 7 show with Melvin Belli. The project was intended to come to an end on Friday, August 11th, 1989, but it never came to that. That was the previously mentioned 1989 rumored suicide of Michael O'Hare, meaning that it was intended for Michael O'Hare to commit suicide off of the MIT tower. There's also something in there about how snipers could have been involved, and for that I would just direct you to read Ray Grant's book, but I'll go back to his post. The main reason people who are interested in the Zodiac case find that Ray Grant's theory is nonsensical is that they're unfamiliar with conceptual art. The most recent example of such a project on that scale was the Gates in Central Park. The project began in 1979 and wasn't realized until 2005, which means it actually had a longer time span than the Zodiac project, 26 years instead of 23. Here's the first paragraph of the Gates. This is the Wikipedia entry, mind you. The Gates were a group of conspiring and compromising people who compromised a site-specific work of art by Bulgarian artist Christo Yavachev and French artist Jean-Claude, known jointly as Christo and Jean-Claude. The artist installed 7,503 vinyl gates along 23 miles of pathways in Central Park in New York City. From each gate, they hung a panel of deep saffron-colored nylon fabric. The exhibit ran from February 12th of 2005 through February 27th of 2005. Note that Christo and Jean-Claude spent 26 years creating a massive project that was available for a grand total of 16 viewing days. It makes sense to you. You may be on your way to understanding the point behind conceptual art. In other words, it's conceptual rather than being something that you can hang on your wall. The other, more violent examples of this are some that are covered in a 1971 video, and because that's posts from the forum, I won't continue. But Ray Grant had a post there. I just wanted to read that off because this is one of the few times when someone has actually talked about conceptual art in the Zodiac Killer mystery. A lot of people talk about the criminal masterpiece loaded with mathematical signatures, and Gareth Penn, as both a researcher and a suspect, gets pulled into that. And I think Gareth Penn has been very influential on the entire world of Zodiac researchers, saying that that was the motive for these crimes, that it was a criminal masterpiece loaded with mathematical signatures. Ray Grant seems to have gone a little bit further by saying that it was a sinister form of conceptual art. Berta Margulies was indeed an artist, and Michael O'Hare was indeed someone who understood architecture as well as mathematics, partnered with somebody like Gareth Penn, who has a very sharp mind for not only things like math, but Morse code, binary. He talked about this very frequently in Time 17. Hugh Penn, a statistician, someone who understood the Department of Transportation. And I would also just want to throw in one quick note. There's a part of Ray Grant's book, Zodiac Killer Solved, when he talks about the automobile connection. And I was even saying that I was going to write some type of fiction that was based on this, like a novel based on this type of theory about the automobile connection in the Zodiac Killer mystery, even if you include the murder of Sherry Jo Bates and the murder of Joan Webster into a Zodiac theory. There is this type of connection to automobiles because a car is present at every single crime scene. The Bates murder, the canonical crimes, the Webster abduction, an automobile is present, and it's almost like there's some type of clue there, or it's one of the few commonalities among all the crimes that they're at lovers' lanes, or even when they were 500 meters away from the car at Lake Berryessa, the Zodiac then returned and wrote a message on the car door. So, what Ray Rand talked about in the book Zodiac Killer Solved is that before the internet, before home computers were very popular, how do you keep track of where somebody is? I mean, can you call their cell phone? No, those don't exist either. You would find out where their car is. So that goes back to the theory about the victims are included in some type of short list, a little list, if you will, and then they go from the list to finding the victims at opportune moments whenever it's possible. I hope I got the phrasing of that right, or the understanding of that right. Now, I would like to go to one more point, and that is that it's my belief that Ray Grant is the person who discovered the connection to the number pi in the word zodiac, and I think he was the first person to do that, so I've read in the past, and I talked about in the previous episode. Now, you have pi with the number 3.14 repeating, right? Or we can even just say the whole thing. 3.1459265359. Yeah, that's the whole thing of pi, right? No, of course, that's not the whole thing. But as you see, pi goes on for a while. Now, if you look at the numbers 3, what's the third letter of the alphabet? C. What's the first letter? A. What's the fourth letter? D. And then that's how you can get these letters that are found in the word zodiac. But then you'll see that there's a 15, a 9, and a 2, 6. I mean, the 15 is a 1 and 5 put together. And the 2-6, of course, is the 26th letter. That's the Z. And the ninth letter would be the I. And that forms into the word zodiac, 15O. So I think Ray Grant was the first person to make that observation. I mean, is it possible that this is all trying to show that it is a type of mathematical signature that has been implanted? It's an excellent observation no matter what. Okay, that's me talking about some good things. Now here's another point that I will strongly challenge. And this is about something that I read in Ray Grant's book, Zodiac Killer Solved. And it talks about Michael O'Hare after he is married, after he has had 2 children. And Ray Grant is asking a question to the audience. Michael O'Hare had a white van and he was driving a white van for a while, after he got married, and he had 2 children, 2 daughters, I believe. What would drive some guy to do that, unless there was some type of, more sinister, more ulterior motive? This is in the book. And my simple answer to that is, I don't know why Michael O'Hare chose to drive a white van instead of a minivan or a sedan or an SUV. Why is he driving a white van? And, Ray Grant even speculates that it's because his mother was a sculptor and it was used to transport her pieces of artwork. But the short answer is, I don't think it's relevant about why Michael O'Hare was driving a white van. And I don't think it's evidence of anything on its own. If you had something else, if you had more evidence, then that would change my position on the subject. However, driving a white van doesn't instantly mean that someone is doing something wrong. And even if you think that it's kind of an odd thing that a person is driving this type of vehicle, or that a person is driving a car that doesn't seem super convenient or super practical for their lifestyle, I mean, Michael O'Hare is an academic, and he has the family thing going on, and maybe it's not the most beneficial vehicle for the family to have. Maybe that's all true. Maybe it's kind of weird for this guy to be driving a white van, but being weird is not a crime. And that also doesn't make you guilty of anything other than just making the decision to own a white van. So that was the part of the book that I would challenge the most harshly. But overall, I do hope you guys will read the book Zodiac Killer Solved by Ray Grant. There are a lot of different things in there, particularly, as I said, some of the points. Number 1, that this is a Zodiac theory that involves a female participant. Number 2, it's a much larger form of conceptual art. Number 3, it incorporates many different crimes, not only the murder of Sherry Jo Bates as well as the murder of Joan Webster, but also Shelley Holmboe, starting fires, and there's lots of hypothesizing. There, I said the word correctly. I did that on purpose just to try and practice. Hypothesizing. Okay, that one didn't sound as good, but you can get the general idea about the word that I'm trying to say. And also, this is a different way of approaching the subject, and I do hope, though, if you do read Ray Grant's book, pay attention to the Sherry Jo Bates timeline, as well as the descriptions and comparisons among the other serial killers in the world and how they operated. I think that will give us a much larger understanding of the Zodiac Killer mystery. And that's all from me now, so thank you for listening to this episode. Thank you to Ray Grant once again for providing me with a copy of his book. And please look out for the episode on Thursday about the disappearance of Donna Lass, where I'm going to be discussing Ray Grant's sections. And once again, he has a timeline. He has his theories on the disappearance of Donna Lass. I do a regular deep dive segment about that. One more time, you can like and subscribe. And tomorrow on True Crime Talk Radio, there will be some things more about Michael O'Hare as a Zodiac suspect in general. Okay, thank you so much, and I will see you on Instagram for the bonus podcast. Until next time.